Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar on integrating multiple planner boards into a Power BI dashboard. My name is Peter Carson. I'm going to be presenting today. I'm the president of Extranet User Manager, also an Office Apps and Services Microsoft MVP. Contact details are here. We're going to be sharing the deck and the recording after the session, so you can get my details from there. Feel free to reach out if you've got questions. And we do have the Q&A open. We've got staff online moderating as well, so they'll answer as they can as we go through the session. We'll have a look as we get towards the end of the session and tackle any open questions that we've got from that point of view. A little background for those of you who haven't joined one of my webinars before on Extranet User Manager. It's actually a family of products now focused on building a digital community outside of your organization. So from a user onboarding point of view, from a documents management with external parties point of view, from a publishing content perspective, broad set of products, very focused these days on Microsoft 365 and Azure Active Directory. So a long history of working in that space. But today's topic is a little different. It's less about that extranet scenario, and it's really about Microsoft Planner and Power BI and how you get those two tools to work together well. So quick agenda, we've done the intros. I'm going to start, for those of you who aren't familiar with Planner and Power BI, a little bit of background on that side. And then we're going to take you into our Envision IT Planner scenario. I'm actually going to open the kimono a fair bit here and share things like our fiscal planning balance scorecard that we're doing, our marketing dashboard, things that we do day in, day out from a planner and a Power BI point of view, because I find that resonates better than a Contoso or Fabricam kind of made up example. So we'll get into the broader Envision IT Planner scenario, how we're using Planner in a lot of different ways and how we want to do roll-ups of that and build Power BI dashboards around that. Challenge being that out of the box, Power BI doesn't connect to Planner. So we'll go into some technical as to how we make that work and pull that content together and publish it out. And then we'll wrap up with another scenario around Balance Scorecard, how we're using it for our fiscal planning processes and tasks associated with that. As I mentioned, Q&A is open throughout, so feel free to post questions as we go through there, and we'll wrap up from there. This is kind of a new topic for me. I did a dry run with staff yesterday, but don't have a strong sense of timing. We may end up finishing well before the hour. I may consume the whole hour, but I'll be respectful and make sure we wrap up at the top of the hour. We always start with a quick poll. You can either open the camera app on your phone and do a quick scan of the QR code here. Don't take an actual picture, just let it pop up with the forms poll. There's only 3 or 4 questions on there. Logan's also posted the link out into the Q&A on the meeting itself as well, so feel free to use that too. I'm going to pause for a minute here and turn my camera off just so we can focus more on the content. So let me send that live. And I just sent my camera live. There we go. Let's see if we can fix that up. That's better. Okay. So take your time going through the Planner side of things. It gives us a context of how people use Planner and Power BI today, and some follow-up questions from there. So let's start by diving into Planner itself. Most of you are probably familiar with it. That's probably what twigged you to come to this session, but just in case not, it is simple is an important part of the phrase, a task management tool. It's not Project Server. It's not this magic, PMO huge solution for doing resource leveling across projects and things like that. It is very much standalone independent plans with buckets and tasks that are organized within that, and you can assign those tasks to people. You can have checklists in those and due dates on them and attachments and comments. So there's a fair bit there, but it is still fairly simple and straightforward. It also has a nice integration with Microsoft To Do. I use that a lot myself for personal task management, and it's nice that my tasks from my very different plans come into that to-do list as well, and I can prioritize across personal tasks, corporate tasks, and plan assigned tasks as part of that. Let me actually flip over and have a look. This is our marketing planner that our marketing team uses to manage things that they're working on. So Logan, who's on the call, is our sales and marketing manager. Andrew is our lead marketing person. So most of the tasks are assigned to them. We've got other tasks assigned out here as well. And we can see, in this particular view, I've grouped it by the assigned to, so I can see, who's got what tasks assigned to them. There's a bunch for Andrew there. There's a bunch for Logan. Or I could flip this around and say, you know what, I want to look at it by bucket and say, okay, what are we doing from a videos and an emails, and this webinar itself becomes a bucket that we manage the tasks for things like getting the event set up, getting the marketing emails sent out and such. And Andrew's still got a couple of open tasks to wrap things up, to take the recording and the slide deck once the session is done and post that up onto the site, and send a follow-up email to all the attendees and registrants saying, hey, here's the updated content from there. So it's a nice way to be able to organize that. And I can see it, like I said, grouped by tasks, or sorry, grouped by bucket, grouped by person. I can flip it into a chart view. It's somewhat useful. I can see a little pie chart here of how are we tracking completed versus not started tasks in there, what priority they are, and things like that. But I can't do sort of more sophisticated filtering. Maybe I want to ignore all the prior to this year completed tasks, because that's just kind of noise that we don't want to look at from this perspective. I can't filter and sort of get more sophisticated with my charting through here, which is where we get into the Power BI that I'm going to talk about in a minute. Or I can flip it into a schedule view and actually see a calendar and say, hey, we've got a number of upcoming things. We've got another webinar that's going to be coming up in June. So there's activities happening leading up to that. Our content creation calendar all drives off of what's happening in Planner here. So we find it is a very good tool from that perspective. Flipping over to Power BI, if you're not familiar with Power BI, it's a great data analysis and visualization tool. It lets you draw in data from umpteen different systems. Whether you've got your data in Excel and some corporate data sources, in a SQL server, in a SharePoint list, external services. There's hundreds and hundreds of connectors that Power BI can connect to, and you can build your own custom connectors through there as well, which is kind of what we've done here. Because unfortunately, even though Planner and Power BI are both Microsoft tools and they're both part of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, they don't play with each other. There's no direct connector from Power BI to Planner. So we've built a little bit of intellectual property, a little bit of code to wire those together that I'm going to get into in terms of how we've made that work. And ultimately, you can publish those dashboards up to the web. So if we come back over to the browser here again, and we say, hey, let's look at one of our Power BI dashboards. This is one that we use for these events themselves. I told you I was going to open the kimono, so we're actually sharing here, each of our webinars that we've been running this fiscal year. We're in FY22 right now, and the dark blue being the people that have registered for events, the light blue being people that have actually attended those events. And this is today's events here. We've got 96 people registered, 0 attended because we don't have the analytics from the session itself. So later today, we've got a Logic App workflow that grabs those analytics from Teams live events and sucks them into Power BI, and we can present them on the report here. So it's pretty cool how that hangs together. And we can see some interesting stats. 80% of our people are known to us. They're part of our Dynamics 365 CRM, but about 20% were net new people. Either somebody forwarded the email on to somebody else, or it came in through SEO. They found us on the website or through an AdWords campaign. And we're actually building this out and going further to start to draw some of those other analytics in. Can we bring in the MailChimp data from our email marketing point of view? Can we bring in our Google Analytics and our Google AdWords data and mash up a full spectrum marketing dashboard? That's sort of our vision of where we're going with this. So Power BI is a great tool to do that with. And then I want to touch a bit on Microsoft 365 groups. So this is a little bit out of date. Matt Waite's a fellow Microsoft MVP. He published this a couple of years ago. Things have changed a little bit, but the idea he was getting across here is when you create something in Microsoft 365, like you create a new Microsoft team, you don't just get a team. You get a whole bunch of other things, which includes things like Planner plans and a SharePoint team site and a OneNote notebook. Power BI used to get created as part of this Microsoft 365 group. Over the last 6-12 months, the Power BI group's kind of gone off on their own and said, you know what, we've got these new version 2 workspaces that are not part of Microsoft 365 groups. So that one kind of comes out of this drawing. And likewise, it used to be that a Microsoft 365 group had one planner plan, and then they realized, you know what, often a group may have multiple plans they want to have. So they added that functionality about a year or two ago to say, hey, we can have multiple plans within one group. But I just wanted to kind of outline that concept of groups and plans and how they fit together from that point of view. So if we look at our internal Envision IT scenario of how we use Planner, we use it quite extensively throughout the organization. You know, we've got the marketing planner that I was showing you there. We use it for our fiscal planning, which I'm going to show later with the balanced scorecard side of things. We've got development and consulting planners. We've got a planner that tracks our request for proposal submissions because we do a lot of RFP responses. You know, we'll spin up planners for client projects, not for every project, but where it makes sense, we do that. Sometimes we use Azure DevOps to manage our planning when we're doing an agile type of project. Other times, Planner works quite well from that perspective. So what have we found? You know, what sort of drawbacks have we run into in terms of how we use Planner? Well, the biggest thing really is it's just challenging to get a single view of all tasks across plans. I can do it personally. You know, if I come back to my Planner window here, I can go to the Planner Hub, and this will show me sort of a high level across plans, but it doesn't let me see any detail within that. Or I can go to my tasks, and it'll show me, you know, what have I not started, in progress, and completed across all plans. But I can't do that company wide. I can't say, okay, you know, let's see how Logan or Andrew is managing their tasks. Are they overloaded? Do we need to rebalance some things? I don't have that level of visibility. Planner Hub doesn't give that to me. And there's sometimes limited visuals. You know, there's charts there, but you can't extend them. You can't sort of add other features to that. And I'll talk about some scenarios where we've done that. There is the ability to label tasks in Planner, and you can use that to group things together. Up until a couple of weeks ago, you only had 6 labels, which was a challenge. You know, that was sort of limited. They've broadened that out. Now I think you get about 24 different labels you can apply through there. But still has limited uses from that perspective. And then lastly, if you do have some sort of roll-up, you know, we've got to make sure that whatever we build still respects the security, that if there's particular plans that not everybody should see, that roll-up needs to respect that as well. So if we've got, you know, we use a management planner for our management group, there's 4 of us on that team. It's not something that we want to share with the organization as a whole until those things are at an appropriate point. So how do we build an architecture to structure that? So I'm going to go through a couple different passes and diagrams to illustrate the concept. It starts with that idea of Microsoft 365 groups that I was talking about before. So every plan belongs to a Microsoft 365 group, and we can have multiple plans within one group. We can have multiple groups, each with their own plans within there. So this is kind of the out of the box from Microsoft on the left-hand side here. Everything on the right is what we've done from a customization or an enhancement of that. And the first thing we did was said, okay, we want to be able to define portfolios. You know, maybe we want to have a marketing portfolio, and marketing may have more than one planner. In fact, it does. So how do we collapse multiple plans together into one portfolio? We can say, okay, plan 1 goes into portfolio 1, but plan 2 and plan 3, which actually come from different groups, go into portfolio 2, and plan 4 goes into portfolio 3. And since we can't connect Power BI directly to Planner, Excel CSVs are sort of our go-to in general when you're doing data integration projects. It's the easy way to get data between things. So how do we get the data out of Microsoft Planner and into Excel CSVs? I'll get to that in a minute from a technical point of view, but the idea is that we're going to collapse multiple plans together into portfolios, and we're going to collapse multiple portfolios together into one set of CSVs that has one Power BI report related to it. And the idea is that anybody that has access to this report is somebody you're comfortable seeing the data that comes from plan 1, 2, and 3 that all roll up into those Excel CSVs. So that's how we've done the security. We could get more sophisticated and start doing what's called row-level security in Power BI, where it filters down the data that the person that's signed into Power BI sees. It gets complicated. This was the simpler way to say, hey, let's just aggregate at this level. And let's take, for example, that management scenario where maybe the plan 4 is our management plan, goes into a management portfolio, and it goes into a separate CSV. And then just the management team has access to this Power BI through here. So technically, how does that happen? Well, basically what we do is we use some Azure Automation. So Azure Automation is a way to run PowerShell scripts or code up in the cloud serverless. So you don't need to spin up a server and manage that environment for you. Microsoft takes care of all that for you. So we've got a script I'll show you later that runs up in the cloud, and it extracts the data from each of these plans. So Planner has a REST API, a way that code can access the data in there through what's called the Microsoft Graph. So it can basically pull all that data out formulate it into those Excel CSVs, and then drop it into what are called storage accounts in Azure. Think of it like a file server. You've got a file server up in the cloud, those Excel CSVs get dropped into them, and the Power BI has a key that lets it read those CSVs from those storage accounts, and then we get our dashboard coming out from there. So that we've got the security at this level here, but we've also got security on the underlying data underneath here. So how do we manage this process? How do we make those decisions of what goes where? Well, we decided we're historically a SharePoint shop. That's still a lot of what we do. Let's use SharePoint lists to manage that. But before we get into the list, I wanted to kind of explain the structure that we've got in place at Envision IT. How are we using Planner today? So we start on the right-hand side here. These are all the different plans that we have in our organization. So I mentioned, marketing has a series of plans. So I showed you the marketing planner, but we also have a planner for our Extranet User Manager website and our Envision IT website, which are two separate branded web properties. And we have a plan around what we call the Ask You Answer. It's a content marketing strategy that we've got going. So those are 4 unique plans that we've arbitrarily said roll up into the marketing portfolio. We have an archive one, which is a place just to put placeholder ones. We have an operations, so we actually use Planner and Power BI quite a bit from an operations, who's working on what projects, and what's our future revenue is going to look like based on resource allocations. That's all happening in Power BI, and we want to bring a bunch of the Planner stuff into that as well. We have a couple of sales planners, we've got client ones, and we've got the management one, which is private to the management group. So what we've done is created 2 storage accounts in Azure that all those Excel CSVs go into. So if we go back a step here, when this Azure Automation is running and it's got these 2 storage accounts, basically what it's doing is one of them is all of these plans and the other one is the management plan. And the way that gets driven is through a series of SharePoint lists that you configure this with. So there's sort of 4 different levels that I want to go through here. And I think actually the best way, I've got some slides that I'll share for the post webinar session, but I think it's better to actually look at it live in the browser. So if I go to SharePoint and I come to my operations team SharePoint site that we've got here, I've got a number of SharePoint lists that drive this process. So let's actually start at the bottom level here, which is the planner plans. So I don't need to manually maintain this list. There's weird letters and number IDs for plans. I don't have to figure any of that out. Basically, I run a script. So if we come back to this step here, so there's a script running here. It basically runs through the tenant and finds every plan that it has access to. Now, it does require that script has credentials that's associated with all the Microsoft plans. I won't get too deep into the security, but assuming that that's all there, it can discover those plans and it can assign list items in SharePoint for each of those plans. Now, at the same time, what it's going to do is go through and figure out all the groups in the tenant as well. And groups may or may not have plans, so you'll see a lot of these have zeros in there. I can filter this down and say, hey, I just want to see groups that actually have some plans associated with it. So here's our groups that we've got. So these basically represent Microsoft Teams or Microsoft 365 groups that have 1 or more plans associated with them. When the script is running through and it's saying, hey, go find me all the plans, it knows what group they belong to. So it wires that up for us. What it doesn't know is what portfolio it should go into, because that's not a concept that Microsoft 365 has. So what we do is we say, come here and just, pick your portfolios, just type them in literally. You just say new and start banging them in, or you can edit it in grid view, right in SharePoint, and define what each of your planner roll-up portfolios are going to be. Now, the portfolios roll up into storage accounts. So if we come back to this view here, so we've got our plans that roll up into portfolios, and these roll up into storage accounts, which is how we're going to secure it and say, okay, if you're allowed to see these plans, then you have access to this into the Power BI. That's how that works. So each portfolio has a storage account associated with it. And we can see this one here, the management one, has a different storage account. And under the hood, there's some things you need to do in Azure to create that storage account and put the details of what it is in here so that the scripts can find it. Once that's set up you don't really need to touch it again from there. So the scripts basically run through that and build that structure out for you. So it'll populate all the plans and all the groups. You decide what portfolios and storage accounts you want, and then you put a plan into a portfolio and a portfolio into a storage account. You've got that set, then you just set this up to schedule to run on a nightly basis, say, and it gathers all that data for you. So let's skip through these. These are just kind of showing those lists that I was just taking you through. And let's actually get into the actual Power BI roll-up side of things. So if I come back over to the browser here, and I come to my Planner Power BI. So I used Power BI Desktop to build this, and I published it up to the Power BI service. And then whoever's a member of this workspace or who has been assigned rights to see this report has access to this. And what we've done is we have this in our operations workspace in Power BI, and we've made our whole staff at Envision IT members of that workspace. So everybody can see this dashboard here. They don't see the management one because that's deployed to a different spot, but they see this one here. So what I'm seeing at this point here now is what I was looking for before, which is show me a roll up across all plans. So we can see, you know, Logan's maybe a little hammered here because he's got 114 tasks that are not started. There's a reason for some of that. There's a bunch of tasks we'll see here in our fiscal year 22 planning that we've pre-decided out into future quarters. So Logan's got a whole bunch of tasks that aren't due for another 6, 8, 12 months from now. And that's true for a bunch of us. He somehow managed to get the lion's share of that. We actually just started surfacing this data up in the last couple of days as I was getting ready for the webinar, and learning some interesting things about you know, how we're allocating tasks and maybe how we need to distribute that out more fairly across the organization. So this is the real value that we see coming out of that, is understanding what that looks like. And you know, Planner gives you some very granular data, like it will give you a % complete on every task, but it won't tell you whether it's, you know, 100% complete, not started, or in progress. So in Power BI, we can build our own buckets and say, okay, if something's 0%, let's call that not started. If it's 100%, let's call it completed. And if it's somewhere in between, 1 to 99%, let's call it in progress. And I find small buckets like this, particularly when you get to visualizations, is a lot more useful. If I just did a pie chart by percentage complete, it would have a whole bunch of wedges in it, then it wouldn't be very meaningful to me. You know, what I really care about is what haven't we started, what have we finished, and what are we working on. And the beauty with Power BI is that this isn't a static report. I can click in and interact with this. So if I say, hey, you know, who's actively working on what right now? So I can click on that in progress here, and you see all the other visualizations changed to show me what that is. Okay, you know, Dinesh, myself, Rick have 3 tasks, you know, 2 through there, 1. I can see how that breaks down by person of who's working on what. And then I say, well, you know, what plans do those fall into? Well, our fiscal year 22 planning is actually the biggest. We've got 6 in progress plans from there. And I can even start control clicking and saying, hey, you know, I want to look at my stuff. So I've taken the in progress and me, and how does that break out? I've got some internal consulting tasks and some operation tasks assigned to me through there. So we can start to get very granular in terms of what that looks like. All right, click again to take that off. I can say, hey, you know, we did a similar bucketing here. So Planner has a concept of a due date and a completed date, but it doesn't really connect those together. So we said, okay, let's build some rules in Power BI. If the task is completed, it has a completed date on it, but it still had a due date. And how did those two compare? Was the due date before or after the completed date? So we can figure out, was that overdue when it was done, or was it done early or on time from that point of view? And likewise, if it's not completed yet, let's compare that to today's date. You know, if it's due yesterday, it's overdue. If it's due tomorrow, it's still upcoming. Had a little bit of fun with the buckets, and we said, okay, you know, there may be no due date. You generally don't want to have wide open tasks in there, but reality is we've got a bunch that are set up that way. You know, soon means in the next 2 weeks. We just arbitrarily pick that as a time frame. So if it's, you know, further out than 2 weeks from a due date point of view, we call it further. If it's within 2 weeks, we call it soon. And we kind of did the same thing with overdue. We said, hey, if it's due in the next 2 weeks, or it was done within 2 weeks of its due date, let's just call it overdue. But if it's more than 2 weeks past its due date, let's call it long overdue, just so we got some arbitrary buckets, and you can build your queries however you want in Power BI to visualize this. That's the whole value of Power BI, is once you've got the data there, you can mash it up and do some really interesting things through there. So we can say, okay, what's our overdue tasks? How does that play out in terms of who's doing what in here? And the reality is, yeah, we had a bunch of overdue tasks, but they're all actually completed. And we're actually doing some filters on here. We're doing a filter, excuse me, where the completed date is after January 1st of this year, because I don't really want to see the 3-4-year-old stuff. I want to see fairly recent. And we can make these filters more creative and say, hey, I want the completed date within the last 6 months. So it rolls as time goes by, and I don't need to adjust that filter. And also, I don't want to look at the archive portfolio, stuff that's closed that, we're not doing anything with that project anymore. Let's just take it off. If I want to go look at it explicitly, I can remove the filter and dig into it. But ordinarily, I don't want to see that. So this ability to have these interactions between the different elements in here and understand how that plays out is super, super valuable. I can click on somebody's name in here and see the tasks across that and what that looks like. And then what I can do is I can say, hey, I want to actually drill into this marketing plan. I want to understand better what's happening with this one particular project. Maybe I've clicked on it here and I can see who's got tasks assigned to it, but I want to do what's called a drill through. So I can drill through to a couple of additional reports. One of them is the plan summary. So if I come here, now I've zeroed in on just the marketing plan. So I've taken all the other plans out and I'm just looking at this one plan. You might say, well, you know what, I can see the charts in Planner for this because we're only looking at one plan, but I don't have this concept of status and I don't have this concept of sort of macro level progress. Those are things that I introduced through the Power BI. So just having the data in Power BI, even within one plan, starts to become really valuable, and I can get a sense of, okay, who's got what going on here. Logan's still got way more tasks than Andrew. Maybe there needs to be some balancing going on there and shuffle some of those tasks around. So this can become part of the conversation and part of the decision around that. The piece I haven't added to this view here that I meant to was to actually have a link here to click through to the planner plan, that I could actually come over to the marketing plan right from the Power BI, because you can have those sort of dynamic hyperlinks that take you from the Power BI right into this view here. So rather than going deeper on it and saying, okay, now I want to start showing all the tasks, I can do that in Power BI here, but probably the better point when it gets to that point is to flip them over here and start looking at the task cards and being able to play with the grouping and manipulate it in that way. And I can do the same thing if I'm back here on the plan summary and I say, hey, I want to drill into that same marketing report, but I want to go into the plan tasks. I can actually surface up the tasks themselves. So while I can see it in Planner, if I want to, I can see it right here as well. And again, I can use these things here to say, hey, what are those no due date tasks? Now there's one for me and there's a couple for Logan. Either we should get some dates in there. So we could easily go over to the planner then, update those, refresh this, and we'd see that come through from there. If I want to look at tasks just on myself, I've actually just got that one task on the marketing plan. So it becomes very interactive and very conversational. And that's the whole idea of Power BI. Okay, so let's come back to our deck here. So I put some screenshots in here just to have for future reference if you're just looking at the PowerPoint deck, but this is basically what we were just looking at there. It really doesn't tell the same story when you look at it as a screenshot, because having that live interaction is what's really valuable here. So if you're looking back at this, I'd encourage you to have a look at the video itself. Okay, so let's get a little deeper under the hood in terms of technically how this is wired together. So this is a different version of that same diagram that I showed you before that gets a little deeper into the actual components up in the Microsoft Cloud that are tying this together. So on the left here, of course, we've got the plans, which are the source of all the data here. And we've got those lists that I was showing you in the SharePoint site. Those are all inputs into the Azure Automation. So there's scripts I'll show you in a second here that run there. And they take that and they turn that into Excel CSVs and they put them into the appropriate storage accounts, all based on what's defined up here in these SharePoint lists. And then we've got a number of Power BI dashboards that point to those storage accounts. So our management one is connected to a management Power BI This one here is actually used for two purposes. We've got it going into the general Envision IT Power BI, which is the one that I've been showing you, but we also repurpose it and use it as part of our fiscal year 22 planning Power BI dashboard. Uses the same data, but it visualizes it in a different way, and I'm going to show you that a little bit later. And this actually consumes an Excel file as part of its data source as well. And all of this needs to get refreshed regularly. You don't want to have to manually refresh this. So we actually use logic apps to do a scheduled once a day that will kick off this process here, update this data, and then go out to these Power BIs and refresh them. So you've got current data in there. And it could be more frequent than once a day, but for this kind of work, I think it's probably reasonable to say daily is current enough. You know, if you want to be able to manually trigger this and do it midday, you can do that as well. So under the hood, what does that look like? Well, everything lives up in Microsoft Azure. So let me actually flip over to the Azure portal and show you what that looks like. So here I'm in the Planner resource group. So a resource group is a container in Azure within an Azure subscription that you can deploy different resources into. It could be virtual machines, it could be Azure Automation, logic apps. There's lots of different things you can deploy up into Azure. So the pieces that we're using here, we've got the Azure Automation account, which is actually doing the go reach into Planner, get that data, put it in those storage accounts. We've got the storage accounts here. It has a runbook, so that's actually a component of the Azure Automation. So that's the actual script that runs. And then this logic app is what does the scheduled refreshes to say, okay, once a day, go refresh those storage accounts and then go refresh those Power BIs. So let's have a look at each of those. So let's actually dive into the automation account. This is sort of the center of it all. So automation accounts can have runbooks associated with them. We only have one in this one here, which is this read planner data. Now, I'm not going to get too detailed into the PowerShell code itself. There's a couple hundred lines of code in here. Basically, what this is doing is going through those SharePoint lists. So let me get to sort of the top of the main part of it. So there's a bunch of credentials work that needs to be done to get access tokens to be able to access Planner from a secure point of view, and then build up the buckets that we're going to be putting all the data into, and then basically spin through all the groups and all the plans within those groups, get all the details, the buckets, the tasks, the checklist items. So we get quite deep down into that, building up that data. And then when we're done all that, we basically spin through and say, hey, let's look at each storage account and what portfolios and plans go in there, and basically output those into the appropriate storage account. So that's what's happening through this work here. And there are some technical challenges that we've run into, the biggest being that Microsoft Planner, when Microsoft created the graph API endpoints that let you get into Planner to pull that data out, they did it in a way that you can only do it with user credentials. And I got a big pet peeve about turning off multi-factor authentication and allowing user credentials to be run in a scheduled process like this. I cover that in my previous talk on secure development. We couldn't go that path. We had to do some trickery around caching or refresh tokens and technical bits to make all that work. I don't want to get too deep technical in this talk, but suffice it to say that security was a big part of what we wanted to do here. We wanted to make sure that that we weren't exposing any security holes by deploying the solution. We're not asking you to turn off multi-factor authentication or do anything wrong from that point of view. So that's the main meat. Is what's happening in that PowerShell to go read the data from Planner and put it into those Excel CSV files that go into these storage accounts. The other piece of it is this logic app here. So this is the one that does the refresh. It's actually a really simple logic app. Go ahead and edit it. Basically, it's got a recurring schedule in here. So I can define whatever I want in here. Right now it's set just to run at 6 a.m. each day. I could click off multiple times a day if I wanted to through that. I can change the frequency to hourly, minute, week, month, whatever I want from that point of view. So you've got a lot of granular control around how often you want the refresh to happen. And basically what it does is says, hey, go run that Azure Automation, go run that run book that I was just showing you. Let that script execute, wait until it's finished. When it's all done, then go refresh that EIT Planner data set. Some of this stuff is preview that I'm showing here, so it's not sort of general availability official from Microsoft, but it works well and it's been out in preview for some time now. So it says go into the operations workspace and refresh that EIT planner data set, and then do the same thing for the FY22 one. I actually haven't wired the management one into this yet, but it would just be another new step in here to add into the Logic App workflow. So that's really it from a technology point of view. I mean, the secret sauce is getting this script built appropriately to be able to pull the data across. The scheduled refresh is pretty straightforward from a Logic Apps point of view. Okay. So let's switch gears. Let's talk about our fiscal year 22 balance scorecard. So this is not a technical topic. This is absolutely a strategic business topic. If you're not familiar with balance scorecards, what we generally do when we're doing our annual planning process as Envision IT is we start with a SWOT analysis. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, threats. So get the whole team together and talk about, hey, what are our strengths? What are our positives internally as an organization? And what are our weaknesses? What could we improve on? And then there's external things, what external opportunities are there out there, and what threats, whether we can control them or not, exist that we should be aware of as an organization. So that's sort of the first step of our planning process. And then we moved into our balanced scorecard, where we've got this is a Kaplan Norton concept's been around for several decades now of organizing your scorecard into 4 quadrants. We've deviated a little bit from the standard. We have a financial and a customer, which are the standard ones. Then we've modified a little bit from learning to employees, and operational excellence is our 4 quadrants. And it's a hierarchy. So each of those 4 quadrants, the idea is in your strategic planning exercise, you define goals for those quadrants. What do you want to do from a customer point of view? What do you want to do from an employee point of view? And out of those goals, you're going to define initiatives. How do you achieve that goal? You've got some initiatives around that. And ultimately, those initiatives have one or more tasks that are driving those. And this is the level that Planner comes in for us. So we're going to be defining tasks, but we want to be able to roll them up to initiatives, to goals, and ultimately to our quadrant. And that's not something that we can do in Planner out of the box. So Power BI becomes an important part of this. So how do we manage this? Well, let's actually start with the Planner side. So if I come back to Planner and I go to our FY22 planning. So our fiscal year starts on March 1st. So our fiscal year 22 started March 1st, 2021. We're still in the last part of our first quarter here. We're actually not as up to date on the tasks that we set out for ourselves, primarily because I didn't have all this reporting and visualization together. So we didn't have good communications to the team of, what's happening when and how's it all working. It's all in the planner, but honestly, it's a little overwhelming to look at it in the planner. We started by defining buckets for the 4 quadrants and then putting tasks down from there. That got a little bit much because there's, so many tasks when you start to look at it across all of that. Then we said, okay, well, let's break some of those tasks into buckets that are initiatives, and we kind of had a mixed bag. Some of the buckets were quadrants and some of the buckets were initiatives. We said, hey, that's not working well for us. Why don't we standardize and say, you know what, let's just make the buckets initiatives. And that's the only thing that they represent. So if we go back to our hierarchy that we have, let me just flip back there for a sec. Tasks go into Planner, but really I should have put the Planner one level higher because buckets represent initiatives. We still don't have the goals or the quadrant in Planner, but we have the tasks and the initiatives. And that's basically what we have here. So finance budgets is one of our initiatives, and the budgets task that has a bunch of checklist items under here is Deb's tasks from a finance point of view, because she's our director of finance. And it's pretty wide. I have a nice ultra-wide monitor that helps see this broader, but doesn't share well from that point of view. But you've got all that data in there. And I can flip the grouping around and say, hey, I want to group it by assigned to look at it by person and understand who's got what from that perspective. But again, it's hard to step back and see the big picture from that. So what we did is we brought this into Power BI. So let me come back here, come to my FY22. And we've got a couple of tabs here that are just really to support the data analysis work that we were doing first. And what we wanted to do was just get a list of all the tasks and buckets. So here we've got a list here of task and bucket. One of the nice things in Power BI is you can come to the ellipse here and say, I just want to export this data, and it'll dump out an Excel file for you. and you can then manipulate that in Excel. So that's exactly what we did, is we fired up Excel and we said, here's our list of buckets that we had. We don't really care at this point about the tasks. We've got the number of tasks in them. We're not interested in mapping at the task level here. What we want to do is assign each bucket to a goal and ultimately to a quadrant from our balanced scorecard point of view. So if we come back to this view here, we're really defining, that list of buckets or that list of initiatives that we've got in Planner. How do we roll that up into goals and quadrants? And this is more just Excel magic. I mean, we've got a list of goals that Deb put together and which quadrant they belong to as a lookup sheet in the Excel, and we basically made this a pick list. So we defined it as a lookup over into that other tab, so we can define what goal each bucket goes to, and then this is just a VLOOKUP cell here that says, okay, go into that other sheet and figure out what quadrant for the goal that was picked here. So this gets populated with the data from Power BI. This gets manually entered to say, hey, assign a goal for every bucket, and then this gets auto-assigned based on the goal from here. Now, we started by pulling the data out of Power BI to get it in here, but we actually round trip it and we take this Excel back into Power BI. So if I come back over into my FY22 planning and I look at my balanced scorecard, we can now take those planner tasks. And we haven't done too much on the visualization side here. I want to go a lot further on this side. But what we've done is said, hey, I want to group these together by quadrant. So what we're showing on the screen here is the number of tasks by quarter. So we've got Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, and even that quarter concept was something that we did in Power BI. We said, let's look at the due date and figure out what quarter that due date falls into and assign Q1 and Q4 through from that. And then take that Excel data and figure out which quadrant each of those tasks fit in. We don't show it on this one here, but we've got the goals that those buckets roll up into as well. So we've got the whole hierarchy available to us through there. And then we can use, who the task is assigned to, what the progress of that task is, and start to mash up that data from here. So I only started playing with this in the last day or two, so I didn't get a chance to get too far with it. But the plan is to be able to use this to communicate to the company as a whole, to say, how are we doing from a balanced scorecard point of view? Are we tracking? What are the outstanding things that we're not getting to? How do we prioritize those? Do we need to push them out into further quarters because we were overly ambitious in terms of what we thought we could get done? Or do we need to reallocate resources? All those sorts of decisions can be made. And it's really hard to make those decisions when you're stuck down in the weeds and you can't see the forest at this view here. So being able to come up a level and say, hey, let's look at it from a macro level, start to analyze it and interact with it, becomes a lot more powerful. So that's really, where we're going with the balanced scorecard point of view. It's not so much about rolling up multiple planners into one view in that example. It's really about how do we take all that raw data that we've got in Planner and mash it up in a different way and present it in a more useful way in Power BI, which is what Power BI is really, really good at. So that's pretty much it. I got a couple of summary points here, but why don't I pause? I don't know if we've got any questions posted in the Q&A there, Logan, that we want to address.
Nope, we're good on questions.
Okay. So just wrapping up, looks like I'm going to give you a little bit of time back on your lunch hours. Not a bad thing. So Planner is a great tool for managing group tasks. You've got a project that you're running that have multiple people in it. Planner's a great way to organize that. Understand its limitations, that it's not a super complex project management office type of tool, but it's great for group work and group projects. And Power BI is an awesome tool for building those rich data visualizations. And it's not just about a static picture, it's about making it a very interactive experience as part of that. With a little bit of additional IP, there was a couple hundred lines of PowerShell script code there. So there was some effort getting that going. Once we've got that structure plays very well and they work very well together. In fact, if you're interested in that IP, we haven't decided, whether we're selling that, giving it away, open sourcing it. But if you're interested and you want to do a project together with us on this stuff, happy to talk with you about what that could look like. We're not looking to strongly commercialize that. And that ability to visualize tasks across plans is super valuable. But even within a single plan, like that FY22 balance scorecard example that I was showing you, Power BI can do a lot to mash that data up and start to answer questions that are difficult to see when you're looking down at the planner board level. And at the end of the day, there's a common theme for me. Security is important. Make sure that you've built a properly secured system and understand who can see what tasks and whether that's appropriate. So from there, a couple of additional webinars that we've got coming up. Not next week, the week after, I'm doing a talk on our open source approach to Teams provisioning. This one's actually long overdue. We've been working for quite some time now. There was a lot of changes that came from Microsoft early this year around how they do provisioning and how their patterns and practices, open source stuff is architected. So we've rolled that into our Teams provisioning. We've done a strong focus on improving the security around that. Kind of comes back to my security talk that I gave a month or so ago. So bringing that all full circle and saying, here's our new version of our Teams provisioning. So looking to launch that out next week and do the webinar the week following on that. And then we're doing a joint webinar with another partner on managing complex projects with Microsoft 365. So this one's kind of relevant to what we're talking about here. It's not specific to Planner rollup in Power BI. It's more broadly, how do you leverage the whole Microsoft 365 groups and teams, SharePoint sites to manage your complex projects? And how do you even include external people as part of that and guests and such and sort of that whole spectrum? So link is there. It's the usual spot up on our Extranet User Manager site for the upcoming events. And we don't have any questions there, so I think we're a wrap. So from there, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you had value from that. If you'd like to learn more about how you can leverage this within your organization, by all means, reach out. Logan can coordinate a session. We can chat more about that and love to have that conversation. Thanks. Bye now.